The Seattle skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Capitol Hill penthouse as I put the finishing touches on my latest interior design proposal. Rain drummed against the glass, typical Pacific Northwest weather that I'd grown to love during my 8 years in this city. My design studio, Harmony Spaces, had just landed its biggest contract yet, a complete renovation of the new Amazon subsidiary headquarters downtown. "Julia, we need to talk." I looked up from my laptop to see my husband Marcus standing in the doorway, his 6-foot frame filling the space with an energy that immediately put me on edge. His expensive Tom Ford suit was perfectly pressed, his dark hair slicked back in that corporate executive style he'd perfected during his climb up the ladder at Pinnacle Financial Group. But something in his steel-gray eyes told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "Can it wait? I'm finalizing the Henderson project timeline and no, it can't wait." Marcus stepped into my home office, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded ominous. "We've been married for 6 years, Julia. 6 years of me supporting your little hobby while you've completely neglected your responsibilities as my wife." I saved my work and closed the laptop slowly, buying myself time to process what he'd just said. My little hobby? Marcus, my business generated over $400,000 last year. That's hardly a hobby. His laugh was cold, humorless. 400,000? Julia, I made 2.7 million last year. Your income is pocket change compared to what I bring to this household. This isn't about money. Everything is about money. Marcus moved to stand behind my chair, placing his hands on my shoulders in what might have looked like an affectionate gesture to an outsider, but felt more like a cage. "And reputation. Do you know what my colleagues say when they ask about my wife and I have to tell them she's playing businesswoman instead of being home where she belongs?" I shrugged away from his touch and stood up, turning to face him. At 5'6", I had to crane my neck to meet his gaze, but I held my ground. "Playing businesswoman. Marcus, I have 12 employees, contracts with major corporations, and you're embarrassing me." His voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse than if he'd been shouting. "Richard's wife hosts charity galas. Thompson's wife organizes fundraisers for the symphony. What does my wife do? She gets her hands dirty, with paint samples and fabric swatches like some common decorator." The dismissal in his tone hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent 4 years building Harmony Spaces from nothing, working 18-hour days, networking, proving myself in an industry dominated by established firms with decades of connections. But to Marcus, it was all just a game I was playing. "I'm not giving up my business," I said quietly. "Yes, you are." Marcus walked over to my bookshelf, running his finger along the spines of my design books and industry publications. "I've been patient, Julia. I let you have your fun, thinking you'd eventually grow out of this phase. But it's gone on long enough. This isn't a phase, Marcus. This is my career, my passion, your what? Your purpose?" He turned back to me, and for a moment I saw something almost pitying in his expression. "Julia, you're 31 years old. Your purpose is to be my wife, to support my career, not compete with it." The rain outside had intensified, creating a steady drumbeat against the windows that matched the pounding of my heart. I looked around. My office, at the design awards on the walls, the vision boards for upcoming projects, the carefully curated collection of materials and samples that represented years of hard work and dedication. "I won't do it," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Marcus nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this response. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but you're leaving me no choice." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. "I think you'll find this changes your perspective." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Inside were divorce papers, already filled out, already signed by Marcus's attorney. The words blurred together at first: irreconcilable differences, division of assets, spousal support. But one phrase jumped out at me with crystal clarity. Petitioner requests that respondent's business assets be considered marital property subject to equal division. You can't be serious. I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign that this was some elaborate, cruel joke. I'm completely serious. Marcus straightened his tie, a gesture I'd seen him make thousands of times before important meetings. You have a choice, Julia. Shut down your little business and come home where you belong, or I'll take half of everything you've built. Your equipment, your client contracts, your reputation, all of it becomes community property in a divorce. The papers rustled in my shaking hands. We have a prenup, which covers assets we brought into the marriage, not assets acquired during the marriage. His smile was sharp, predatory. Your business started after we were married. Every contract, every piece of equipment, every relationship you've built, it's all fair game. I sank back into my chair, the weight of his threat settling over me, like a heavy blanket. He'd clearly thought this through, probably consulted with his attorney friends at the country club. This wasn't an impulse decision. It was a calculated attack designed to strip me of everything I'd worked for. There's more, Marcus continued, his tone almost conversational now. I've already spoken to a few key people in the industry. Amazing how quickly word travels in Seattle's business community. One mentioned that you're going through a messy divorce, that your judgment might be compromised, that you might not be able to fulfill your contracts. You wouldn't. But even as I said it, I knew he would. Marcus had built his career on understanding leverage, on knowing exactly which pressure points to apply to get what he wanted. I already have. He checked his Rolex, a $40,000 Daytona that I'd bought him for his last promotion. The Henderson Group called my office this afternoon. Apparently they're reevaluating their vendor relationships in light of recent developments. The room seemed to tilt around me. The Henderson project was my biggest contract, the one that would establish Harmony Spaces as a major player in Seattle's commercial design market. Without it, I'd struggle to make payroll, let alone maintain the high-end reputation I'd spent years building. Why are you doing this? I whispered. Marcus's expression softened slightly, and for a moment, I glimpsed the man I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago at that corporate charity function. The charming, ambitious young executive who'd swept me off my feet with romantic dinners and weekend getaways to his family's cabin in the San Juan Islands. Because I love you, he said, and I almost believed the sincerity in his voice. Because I want us to have the life we're supposed to have. The life we planned before you got distracted by this business nonsense. We never planned for me to give up my career. We planned for you to be my wife. Really be my wife, not someone who's too busy with client meetings and project deadlines to attend company functions, or host dinner parties, or do any of the things that matter for my career advancement. The mention of his career advancement made something click into place. Marcus had been passed over for promotion to senior vice president twice in the past year. His colleagues, Richard and Thompson, the ones he'd mentioned, had both moved ahead of him despite having less experience. And their wives. This is about your promotion, I said, the pieces falling together. You think having a stay-at-home wife will help your image at Pinnacle. It's not about thinking, Julia. I know it will. Marcus walked over to the window, gazing out at the city lights. The partners want someone who represents stability, tradition, family values. They want someone whose wife understands her role in supporting his success. And if I don't agree to this, if I fight the divorce? He turned back to me, and the warmth was gone from his eyes again. Then I'll make sure you lose everything. The business, the house, your reputation in this city. I have connections, Julia. I have resources you can't even imagine, and I'll use every single one of them to destroy what you've built if that's what it takes to bring you home. The threat hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Outside, Seattle continued its evening rhythm, traffic flowing down Pine Street, couples walking home from dinner, the normal life of a city that had no idea one woman's world was crumbling in a penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay. I looked down at the divorce papers again, focusing on the legal language to keep from falling apart completely. But something caught my eye. A small detail that Marcus probably hadn't expected me to notice. The papers were dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. He'd been planning this for almost a month while I'd been working 16-hour days to finalize the Henderson contract. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked quietly. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Marcus shrugged. "Long enough to make sure I had all my ducks in a row. This isn't personal, Julia. It's business. I need a wife who supports my ambitions, not someone who's competing with them. And if I give up the business, if I become the perfect corporate wife you want, what guarantee do I have that you won't just find another reason to threaten divorce?" "You don't." His honesty was brutal in its simplicity, but you'll have a comfortable life. Financial security. A position in Seattle society that money can't buy. Isn't that worth more than playing with paint colors and fabric samples? I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. The woman who'd walked into this office an hour ago, confident, successful, in control of her destiny, was gone. In her place was someone I barely recognized, a person backed into a corner by the man who was supposed to love and support her. "I need time to think," I managed to say. "You have until Friday." Marcus moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Julia, I'm not the villain here. I'm trying to save our marriage. But I won't watch you continue to embarrass me and undermine everything I've worked for. Choose wisely." The door closed behind him with that same soft click, leaving me alone with the rain and the city lights, and the devastating realization that my husband, the man I'd shared my bed and my dreams with for 6 years, was willing to destroy everything I cared about to get what he wanted. I walked over to the window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The Space Needle was visible in the distance, its lights twinkling like a beacon in the darkness. How many times had Marcus and I stood at this very window planning our future together? How many conversations had we had about our dreams, our goals, our shared vision of success? But as I stood there, replaying every word of our conversation, I began to notice things I'd missed in the moment. The way Marcus had referred to specific conversations with his colleagues, naming names and details that suggested this went deeper than just social pressure. The way he'd known exactly which legal pressure points to apply, as if he'd been researching divorce law for months. The way he'd already contacted people in my industry, sabotaging my reputation before I even knew there was a problem. This wasn't a desperate husband trying to save his marriage. This was a calculated attack by someone who'd decided I was an obstacle to his ambitions and was willing to destroy me to clear the path. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Sarah Chen, my attorney, and one of the few people in Seattle who knew me well enough to understand what Harmony Spaces meant to me. It was after 8 p.m., but Sarah had told me to call any time if I ever needed legal advice. "Julia, is everything okay?" Sarah's voice was warm with concern. "I need to see you tomorrow," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "It's about Marcus. He's filed for divorce, and he's trying to take my business." There was a long pause. "Bring everything," Sarah said finally. "Every document, every contract, every communication you have with him about the business. And Julia, don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't let him know you're consulting with me." "Why?" "Because if he's willing to go this far, there's probably more you don't know about yet. And the only way to protect yourself is to be smarter than he thinks you are." After I hung up, I stood in my office for a long time, looking at the life I'd built. The awards on the walls, the portfolio of completed projects, the business cards from clients who'd become friends and advocates. Marcus thought he could take it all away with legal threats and social pressure. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me, I'd built Harmony Spaces from nothing once before. If he wanted to play hardball, I'd show him exactly what a woman with nothing left to lose could accomplish. The game was on, but I had a feeling Marcus had no idea what. He'd just started. As I began gathering documents and making notes, rain continued to streak down the windows of my office, washing the city clean and preparing it for whatever was coming next. The law offices of Chen & Associates occupied the 32nd floor of the Columbia Center, offering a commanding view of Seattle's financial district that I'd normally find inspiring. Today, it just reminded me of how high the stakes were. Through the conference room windows, I could see the Pinnacle Financial Group building, where Marcus was probably sitting in his corner office, confident that his ultimatum had broken me. He was wrong. "I've reviewed everything you brought me," Sarah said, spreading documents across the polished table between us. "The good news is that your prenup is more comprehensive than Marcus probably remembers. The bad news is that he's not entirely wrong about community property laws." I leaned forward, studying the legal papers that would determine my future. Sarah Chen was one of Seattle's top family law attorneys, a Harvard graduate who'd built her reputation defending high-net-worth individuals in complex divorces. Her corner office was filled with awards and photos of her with Washington state politicians and judges. But what I valued most was her reputation for being ruthless when her clients were being manipulated. "Walk me through it," I said. "Your prenup protects assets you brought into the marriage, but Harmony Spaces was established 2 years after your wedding. Technically, any business built during the marriage using marital resources, including his income that supported your living expenses while you were building the company, could be considered community property." My heart sank. "So he can take half my business?" "He can try, but there are several factors working in your favor." Sarah pulled out a thick folder marked with my name. "First, you kept meticulous records. Every business expense, every investment of your own money, every hour of unpaid labor you put into building the company. This documentation shows that Harmony Spaces was built primarily through your individual efforts and personal investment." She opened the folder, revealing printouts of bank statements, receipts, and financial records I'd provided. "Second, Marcus never contributed directly to the business. He didn't provide startup capital, labor, or business advice. In fact, these email exchanges show he actively discouraged your business development." I looked at the printed emails. Messages where Marcus had complained about my work schedule, dismissed my business achievements, and pressured me to scale back my client commitments. At the time, I'd thought he was just stressed about his own career. Now I realized he'd been building a paper trail to undermine my claim to my own company. "The third factor," Sarah continued, "is that Marcus has significantly higher earning capacity than you do. Courts are reluctant to award business assets to a spouse who doesn't need them for financial survival, especially when that spouse earns several times more than the business owner. But he's already started sabotaging my client relationships," I said, thinking about the Henderson Group contract that was still in limbo. "If he destroys my reputation, the business won't be worth fighting for." Sarah's expression hardened. "That's where things get interesting. Interfering with a spouse's business relationships during divorce proceedings can be considered economic abuse. It's actionable, both in family court and potentially in civil court." She pulled out another document, a legal brief that looked like it had been prepared in advance. "I've been researching Marcus's background since you called last night. Did you know that Pinnacle Financial has a strict ethics policy regarding conflicts of interest and misuse of company resources?" "What do you mean?" "Marcus used his position and professional connections to interfere with your business contracts. The Henderson Group's CFO sits on Pinnacle's board of directors. Marcus leveraged his professional relationship to damage your company. That's a violation of his employment agreement." I stared at her, processing this information. "You think his company would care about that?" "I think Pinnacle Financial Group cares deeply about its reputation and compliance with federal regulations. They're currently being reviewed by the SEC for some unrelated issues with their investment advisory practices. The last thing they need is a senior executive using company relationships for personal vendettas." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we gather evidence of Marcus's interference with your business, document every instance of him using his professional position inappropriately, and prepare to fight this. Divorce with everything we have. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. But first, I need to ask you something important. How well do you really know your husband's business practices? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, in 6 years of marriage, have you ever noticed anything questionable about how he conducts business? Any conversations that seemed odd? Any patterns of behavior that didn't quite add up? I thought back over the years of our marriage, trying to remember details about Marcus's work that I'd dismissed as boring or irrelevant. He travels a lot. For client meetings. Always has. And he's very secretive about his client files. Says it's confidentiality requirements. Where does he travel? All over. California, New York, sometimes international trips. He says it's for high net worth client meetings and investment opportunities. I paused, a memory surfacing. Actually, there was something odd about his expenses. Last year, when we were doing our taxes, I noticed some of his business travel receipts didn't match up with what he'd told me about his trips. Sarah leaned forward. Can you be more specific? He said he was in Los Angeles meeting with entertainment industry clients, but the receipts showed charges in Las Vegas. When I asked about it, he said the client meeting had been moved at the SCI. Last minute, but he seemed defensive about it. Anything else? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think past the emotional trauma of the past 24 hours. Phone calls. He gets a lot of calls at odd hours, late at night, early in the morning. He always takes them in his home office with the door closed. And sometimes he'll get a call and suddenly have to travel somewhere with very little notice. Has he ever mentioned specific clients by name? Never. He says client confidentiality is sacred in wealth management. But I trailed off, remembering something that had always bothered me. The money doesn't quite add up. What do you mean? Marcus says he made $2.7 million last year, but our lifestyle doesn't reflect that kind of income. We live well, but not like people who make $3 million a year. I always assumed he was being conservative with our spending, but now I'm wondering if there's more to it. Sarah made notes on a legal pad, her pen moving quickly across the page. Julia, I want you to think very carefully about what I'm about to ask. Do you have access to Marcus's home office? His computer? His files? I have the password to our shared computer, but he has a separate laptop that he keeps locked in his office safe. And yes, I know the combination. It's our wedding date. I'm not suggesting you do anything illegal, Sarah said carefully, but if you happen to discover evidence that Marcus was engaged in questionable business practices, that information could be very relevant to your divorce proceedings. I understood what she was suggesting without her having to spell it out. If Marcus is hiding something at work, something that could jeopardize his position at Pinnacle, then the balance of power in your divorce shifts dramatically. Sarah closed the folders and looked at me directly. Julia, I've been practicing family law for 15 years. I've seen every manipulation tactic in the book. What Marcus is doing? To you, the ultimatum, the business interference, the systematic attempt to isolate you and destroy your independence. It's classic abusive behavior dressed up in expensive suits and legal language. Her words hit me like a physical blow. You think Marcus is abusive? I think Marcus is a controlling man who's used to getting his way, and he's willing to destroy you rather than accept that you have your own dreams and ambitions. That's emotional and financial abuse, regardless of whether he ever raised a hand to you. I sat in silence for a moment, processing this new framework for understanding my marriage. The subtle put-downs, the constant pressure to prioritize his career over mine, the way he'd isolated me from friends who might have supported my business ambitions, had I been living with an abuser without realizing it. What do we do now? I asked. We build a case. We document everything, and we prepare for the possibility that when Marcus realizes you're not going to roll over and play dead, he's going to escalate his tactics. Sarah handed me a business card. This is a private investigator I work with regularly. If you decide you want to know more about what Marcus is really doing during those mysterious business trips, she can help. I looked at the card. Rachel Martinez, licensed private investigator, with a downtown Seattle address. How much would something like that cost? Less than half your business is worth, Sarah said simply. Julia, you have two choices here. You can accept Marcus's ultimatum, give up everything you've worked for, and spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd fought back. Or you can fight for what's yours and risk everything on the chance that you're stronger and smarter than he thinks you are. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city where I'd built my life and my business. Somewhere down there, Marcus was probably having lunch with colleagues, confident that his wife would be home by the weekend, properly subdued and ready to play her assigned role. There's something else you should know, I said, turning back to Sarah. Marcus mentioned that he'd already talked to people in my industry. That word was spreading about the divorce. But I checked with my contacts yesterday evening, and no one had heard anything. Either he was bluffing, or he's planning to follow through on his threat if you don't comply. Sarah nodded grimly. That's actually good news for us, if he starts actively sabotaging your business relationships now. While we're building our case, we'll have real-time evidence of his interference. So I should refuse his ultimatum? I think you should do whatever feels right to you. But I also think you should know that bullies like Marcus rarely stop escalating until someone forces them to stop. If you give in now, what's to prevent him from making the same threat whenever he wants something from you in the future? She was right, and we both knew it. This wasn't really about my business or his career. It was about control. Marcus had spent 6 years slowly, subtly undermining my independence, and now that he'd shown his hand, there was no going back to the way things were. I want to hire the private investigator, I said, and I want to fight this divorce with everything we have. Sarah smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from her all morning. Good. Now let's talk strategy. First, you're going to go home and act like nothing has changed. Be the dutiful wife considering his proposal. Don't let him know you've consulted with an attorney. How long do we have? He gave you until Friday to decide, which gives us 3 days to gather preliminary information. Rachel can start surveillance immediately, and I'll begin preparing our counterfiling. But Julia, once we start this process, there's no going back. Marcus is going to realize that you're not the pushover he thought you married, and he's not going to take that well. I thought about the man who'd stood in my office yesterday, the cold calculation in his voice as he detailed exactly how he planned to destroy everything I cared about. The Marcus I'd fallen in love with might have been capable of change, but that man had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I understand, I said. What do you need me to do? Sarah handed me a detailed list of documents and information to gather. Start with his home office. Look for anything unusual. Client files, travel records, financial documents that don't match what he's told you about his income or business activities. Take photos with your phone, but don't remove anything he might notice is missing. And if he catches me, then you're a concerned wife trying to understand the family finances during a difficult time. But be careful, Julia. If Marcus is hiding something significant, and if he realizes you're investigating him. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the risks, but I also understood that I was fighting for more than just my business. I was fighting for my right to exist as something other than an extension of Marcus's ambitions. As I left Sarah's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of my own power. Marcus had made the mistake of thinking that 6 years of marriage had made me weak, dependent, controllable. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The elevator descended through 32 floors of Seattle's business district, carrying me back down to street level where my real life waited. By the time the doors opened, I had transformed back into the woman Marcus expected to see when he came home. Confused, frightened, overwhelmed by his ultimatum. But underneath that performance, a different woman was awakening, someone who'd been asleep for too long, who'd been too trusting, too focused on building a life to notice that life was being used against her. Marcus wanted a war. He was about to get one. The house felt different when I returned from Sarah's office, like a stage set where I was about to perform the most important role of my life. Every room held memories of the marriage I'd thought we had, but now I saw them through new eyes. Evidence of a relationship built on my willingness to accommodate Marcus's needs while sacrificing my own. I had 3 days to gather intelligence before Marcus expected my answer. 3 days to uncover whatever secrets he was hiding while pretending to be the dutiful wife considering his proposal. The irony wasn't lost on me that after 6 years of marriage, I was finally about to discover who my husband really was. Marcus wouldn't be home until after 7, his usual pattern of staying late at the office to project dedication to the partners. That gave me almost 5 hours to search his home office systematically. I started with the obvious places: his desk drawers, filing cabinets, the bookshelf where he kept his professional journals and industry publications. The first thing I noticed was how meticulously organized everything was. Marcus had always been neat, but this went beyond normal tidiness. Every document was labeled, dated, and filed with military precision. Bank statements in one drawer, sorted by month and year. Investment records in another, cross-referenced with a spreadsheet that tracked performance metrics. Professional correspondence filed alphabetically by sender. But as I photographed documents with my phone, patterns began to emerge that didn't match what Marcus had told me about his work. Travel receipts showed frequent trips to cities he'd never mentioned: Phoenix, Miami, Denver. Hotel charges for extended stays that he'd never explained. And the amounts were substantial: 5-star hotels, expensive restaurants, charges that seemed excessive even for high-net-worth client entertainment. I found something else interesting in his desk drawer: a second cell phone. Not his work phone, which I knew about, but a third device that I'd never seen him use. It was locked, but I made note of the model and number for Rachel, the private investigator Sarah had recommended. The most revealing discovery came in his client correspondence file. Marcus had always told me that he worked with entertainment, industry clients, tech entrepreneurs, and family trust accounts, but the letters and emails I found painted a different picture. References to investment opportunities in emerging markets and alternative asset diversification strategies that sounded more like code than legitimate financial planning. One email chain particularly caught my attention. It was between Marcus and someone named Viktor Kozlov, discussing a private placement opportunity in Eastern European real estate markets. The amounts mentioned were staggering, tens of millions of dollars, and the language was vague enough to suggest these weren't traditional investments. I photographed everything, my hands shaking as I realized I might be documenting something that went far beyond marital infidelity or simple business ethics violations. If Marcus was involved in money laundering or other financial crimes, it would explain both his secrecy and his desperate need to control me. A wife who ran her own business, who had her own professional network and financial independence, was a liability he couldn't afford. The safe was my last target, and I saved it for when I'd gathered everything else. Marcus thought our wedding date was sentimental enough to be secure, never imagining that the woman who'd walked down the aisle to marry him would one day use that date to expose his secrets. Inside the safe, I found what I'd been looking for: his personal laptop, along with several external hard drives and a collection of documents that weren't filed with his other papers. Bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of, showing balances that dwarfed what Marcus claimed to earn. Correspondence with offshore banking institutions in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, and most damning of all, a detailed spreadsheet, tracking what appeared to be money transfers through multiple shell companies. I didn't have time to examine everything in detail, but I photographed as much as I could, focusing on documents that showed the clearest evidence of financial irregularities. One particular bank statement caught my attention: a Cayman Islands account with a balance of over $12 million, with regular deposits and withdrawals that suggested active money movement. As I worked, I kept one ear tuned to the sound of Marcus's car in the driveway. The garage door opener had a distinctive rumble that would give me enough warning to close the safe and return everything to its proper place. But as the afternoon wore on, I became increasingly absorbed in the scope of what I was uncovering. Marcus wasn't just hiding money from me. He was running what appeared to be a sophisticated financial operation that had nothing to do with legitimate wealth management. The client names, the international banking relationships, the complex web of shell companies. It all pointed to something that would definitely violate his employment agreement with Pinnacle Financial and might well be illegal. By 6 o'clock, I had over 300 photos documenting Marcus's secret financial activities. I'd returned everything to its original position, locked the safe, and retreated to the kitchen to start dinner, playing the role of the wife who'd spent her day contemplating her husband's ultimatum. When Marcus walked through the door at 7:15, I was standing at the stove stirring risotto, a picture of domestic tranquility. He kissed my cheek, a gesture that now felt like performance art, and asked about my day. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him, which was certainly true. "About the choice I need to make." "And?" His voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the tension underneath. "I understand why you're frustrated. I know my business has taken up a lot of my time and attention." I turned to face him, channeling every acting class I'd ever taken to project uncertainty and vulnerability. But giving it up entirely, it's such a big step. Marcus loosened his tie, a gesture I'd seen thousands of times but now recognized as a tell. He did it when he thought he was winning a negotiation. "Julia, I know it seems overwhelming now, but think about the life we could have. You could focus on the things that really matter. Supporting my career, building our social connections, maybe starting a family." Starting a family. He'd never mentioned children during our marriage, but now he was adding it to his list of reasons why I should abandon my career. The manipulation was so transparent, I wondered how I'd missed it for 6 years. "What about my employees?" I asked. "I have 12 people depending on Harmony Spaces for their livelihood. They'll find other jobs. The design industry is bigger than one small firm." Marcus moved closer, placing his hands on my shoulders in that possessive gesture I was learning to hate. "Julia, you're talented and creative, but you're also naive about how business really works. This company you've built, it's not sustainable long-term. Better to end it now, on your terms, than to watch it fail when you can't compete with established firms." The condescension in his voice was breathtaking. He was telling me that my $400,000 business, with major corporate contracts and a growing reputation, wasn't viable. Meanwhile, he was running what appeared to be a money laundering operation out of our home office. "I'll need more time to wind down operations," I said carefully. "Even if I decide to transition away from the business, I can't just abandon my current projects. I have professional obligations." Marcus's grip on my shoulders tightened slightly. "How much time?" "A few months, at least. Maybe longer, depending on how quickly I can transfer clients to other firms." "No." His voice was flat, final. "I told you. This ends now. I won't spend months watching you drag this out, hoping I'll change my mind." "But Marcus, I have contracts. Break them." "I can't just break contracts. There are legal implications, financial penalties. Then I'll help you handle the legal issues. My attorney can draft termination letters, negotiate settlements. Whatever it takes." Marcus released my shoulders and stepped back, but his eyes never left my face. "Julia, you're not understanding the situation. This isn't a negotiation. I'm offering you one chance to end this gracefully, to shut down your business and come home to your real responsibilities. If you won't take that chance, then we move to the alternative, The divorce. The divorce, and everything that comes with it. Marcus straightened his tie again, back in full corporate mode. I spoke to my attorney today. The preliminary paperwork is already prepared. If you force me to file, I'll seek immediate injunctive relief to freeze your business assets pending the division of community property. You won't be able to operate, pay your employees, or fulfill your contracts while the case is in litigation. The threat was clear. Comply immediately, or watch him destroy everything I'd built through legal warfare. But now I had ammunition he didn't know about. I understand, I said quietly. You're asking me to trust you with my future. I'm asking you to trust your husband, the man who's loved and supported you for 6 years. Marcus moved to the wine cabinet, selecting a bottle of the Bordeaux we usually saved for special occasions. Let's have dinner and talk about what our life will look like when you're free from all this business stress. As Marcus opened the wine and served our meal, he painted a picture of the life he envisioned for us. Country club memberships, charity board positions, dinner parties with his colleagues and their wives. A world where I would exist as an accessory to his ambitions, where my value would be measured by how well I enhanced his reputation and supported his career advancement. Richard's wife, Jennifer, is on the board of the Seattle Art Museum, he said, cutting into his salmon. She mentioned, they're looking for new members. It would be perfect for you. Combines your artistic background with the kind of social position that would benefit both of us. What about my own artistic interests? My design work? You could do interior design as a hobby, maybe help friends with their homes, volunteer to decorate for charity events. All the creative outlet you need, without the stress and responsibility of running a business. The condescension was breathtaking, but I kept my expression neutral. And financially? How would we handle the loss of my income? Marcus waved dismissively. Julia, your income is insignificant compared to what I make. We'll barely notice the difference. What about my employees? Sarah, Mike, the whole team that's been with me for years? They're not your responsibility anymore. You're thinking like a business owner when you need to start thinking like my wife. Marcus reached across the table to take my hand. I know this is hard, but sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we love. I wanted to laugh at the irony. He was asking me to sacrifice everything while he contributed nothing but ultimatums and threats. But I played my part, nodding, thoughtfully as if I were genuinely considering his proposal. I need to sleep on it, I said finally. This is the biggest decision of my adult life. Of course. Marcus squeezed my hand. But Julia, don't overthink this. Sometimes the right choice is the one that feels scary at first. After dinner, Marcus retreated to his office to catch up on some client work, which I now knew probably meant managing his offshore accounts and shell company operations. I cleaned the kitchen, then settled in the living room with a book, playing the role of the dutiful wife, spending a quiet evening at home. But my mind was racing. The evidence I'd gathered painted a picture of financial crimes that would not only end Marcus's career, but potentially land him in federal prison. The question was how to use this information most effectively. I needed to speak with Rachel Martinez, the private investigator, and get professional analysis of what I'd found. At 10 o'clock, I told Marcus I was going to bed early, claiming the stress of the decision was giving me a headache. He murmured sympathetically and promised to join me soon, but I knew he'd be in his office for hours. His mysterious phone calls often came late at night. In our bedroom, I transferred the photos from my phone to a secure cloud storage account Sarah had recommended, then deleted them from my device. If Marcus ever checked my phone, he'd find nothing. More suspicious than the usual photos of design projects and social media snapshots. As I lay in the dark, listening to the murmur of Marcus's voice through the office door, I thought about the woman I'd been 24 hours ago. She'd been successful but naive, independent but not truly free. She'd built a business while remaining emotionally dependent on a man who saw her achievements as threats to his control. That woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, Smarter, more dangerous. Someone who understood that sometimes you had to be willing to destroy everything to save what mattered most. The next morning, Marcus left for work with a kiss and a reminder that I had less than 48 hours to make my decision. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I called Rachel Martinez. "I need to see you today," I said when she answered. "I have information that changes everything." Rachel Martinez's office was nothing like Sarah's polished corporate suite. Located in a converted warehouse in Georgetown, it felt more like a private detective's office from a noir film. Exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and enough surveillance equipment to stock a small spy shop. But Rachel herself commanded immediate respect. A former Seattle PD detective with 20 years of experience in financial crimes investigation. "Holy shit," she said, scrolling through the photos on her tablet. "Julia, do you understand what you've uncovered here?" I sat across from her desk, coffee growing cold in my hands, as she analyzed the evidence I'd gathered from Marcus's office. "I think my husband is laundering money, but I'm not sure how serious it is." "Serious?" Rachel looked up at me with something approaching awe. "This isn't just money laundering. This is a sophisticated international financial operation. These shell companies, the offshore accounts, the pattern of transactions. Your husband is moving serious money for some very dangerous people." She turned the tablet screen toward me, pointing to one of the bank statements I'd photographed. "Look at these deposit patterns. Regular transfers of exactly $2 million, always on the 15th of each month, from different source accounts. That's not legitimate investment management. That's organized crime using your husband to clean their money." The room seemed to tilt around me. I'd known Marcus was hiding something significant, but the scope of what Rachel was describing went far beyond anything I'd imagined. "How long do you think this has been going on?" "Based on these account dates. At least 3 years. Probably longer." Rachel pulled up another image on her tablet. "And see this correspondence with Viktor Kozlov. He's on the FBI's watch list for suspected ties to Eastern European organized crime. Your husband isn't just laundering money, he's laundering money for the Russian mob." I felt physically sick. For 3 years, while I'd been building my design business and thinking we had a normal marriage, Marcus had been running a criminal enterprise out of our home. Every business trip, every mysterious phone call, every secretive client meeting, it had all been part of something that could destroy both of us. "What does this mean for my divorce?" I asked. "It means the balance of power just shifted dramatically in your favor." Rachel leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile spreading across her face. "Julia, your husband is facing potential federal charges for money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. When this comes to light, and it will come to light, he's looking at 20 years minimum in federal prison. But I could be implicated too. We're married, we share financial accounts. Not if you report it first." Rachel's expression grew serious. "There's something called the innocent spouse doctrine that can protect you from liability for your husband's financial crimes, but only if you can prove you had no knowledge of the illegal activity and you cooperate fully with federal investigators." D'accord. Implications hit me like a lightning bolt. I could not only protect myself from Marcus's criminal liability, I could use his crimes to destroy his ability to threaten me. A man facing federal charges for money laundering wouldn't be in a position to fight for half my business or sabotage my client relationships. "What do we do now?" I asked. "First, we document everything. I'm going to enhance these photos, cross-reference the account numbers and shell companies, build a comprehensive picture of the operation." Rachel opened a thick folder on her desk. "Then we contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force. They've been investigating this kind of money laundering operation for years. Your evidence could be the breakthrough they need." "How long will that take?" "Days, not weeks. Federal financial crimes investigations move fast once they have solid evidence, and what you've provided is beyond solid. It's a roadmap to multiple felonies." Rachel stood up and moved to a wall, covered with surveillance photos and organizational charts. "But Julia, Once we trigger this process, there's no going back. Your husband's life is going to explode, and you need to be prepared for the fallout. I thought about Marcus's ultimatum, his calm confidence that he held all the cards in our relationship. In less than 24 hours, I had to give him my answer about shutting down my business. Instead, I was going to give him something very different. "I'm ready," I said. "What do I need to do?" Rachel outlined the plan with military precision. She would spend the rest of the day enhancing and analyzing the evidence, preparing a comprehensive report for federal investigators. I would return home and maintain my cover as the conflicted wife considering her husband's proposal. Tomorrow, while Marcus was at work, federal agents would execute search warrants on both our home and his office at Pinnacle Financial Group. "The timing is crucial," Rachel explained. "We want to catch him completely off guard, with no opportunity to destroy evidence or flee. Based on the scope of this operation, he probably has contingency plans. Fake passports, offshore accounts, set up for emergency access. We can't give him time to implement them. What about his threat to destroy my business? He said he'd freeze my assets if I didn't comply. A man facing federal money laundering charges isn't going to be filing divorce papers anytime soon." Rachel's smile was fierce. "And once Pinnacle Financial discovers they've been harboring a criminal enterprise, Marcus won't have the professional connections to sabotage your client relationships. He'll be too busy hiring criminal defense attorneys." As I drove home through Seattle's afternoon traffic, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Absolute clarity about my future. The scared, confused woman who'd discovered divorce papers 3 days ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood exactly what she was fighting for and how to win. Marcus was already home when I arrived, which was unusual for a Thursday afternoon. He was standing in the kitchen with a glass of whiskey, his expression unreadable as I walked through the door. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. My heart rate accelerated, but I kept my voice steady. "About what?" "About your decision. I know I said you had until tomorrow, but I need to know now." Marcus set down his glass and turned to face me fully. "Julia, I got a call today from someone who's been asking questions about you, about your business, your financial records, your background." I felt the blood drain from my face. Had someone discovered my investigation? Had Marcus somehow learned about my meeting with Rachel? "What kind of questions?" I managed to ask. "The kind that suggests someone is conducting due diligence on you. Background checks, financial verification, the sort of thing that happens when you're being considered for a major contract or partnership." Marcus's eyes were cold, calculating. "Who have you been talking to, Julia?" I forced myself to breathe normally, to think through the possibilities. Marcus was fishing, trying to determine if I'd been sharing information about our marriage or his business. This was a test, and my answer would determine whether he escalated his threats or continued to believe he had me under control. "I haven't talked to anyone about our personal business," I said, which was technically true. I hadn't discussed our marriage with potential business contacts, but I have been exploring options for the future of my company. If I'm going to shut down Harmony Spaces, I need to understand what that means for my employees and my contracts. "What kind of options?" "Merger possibilities. Maybe selling the client list to another firm instead of just walking away." I moved to the counter, pouring myself a glass of water to buy time. "Marcus, I've spent 4 years building this business. Even if I agree to shut it down, I have responsibilities to the people who've worked with me." Marcus studied my face for a long moment, and I could almost see him weighing my explanation against his suspicions. Finally, he nodded slowly. "That's actually smart thinking," he said. "If you can sell the business assets instead of just abandoning them, it would provide some compensation for the employees and might even generate enough money to pay off any contract penalties." I felt a surge of bitter amusement. Marcus was praising me for being smart enough to liquidate my business efficiently, having no idea that I was actually preparing to destroy his life. "So you support me exploring those options?" I asked. as long as the end result is the same. You out of the business and home where you belong. Marcus finished his whiskey and moved closer to me. Julia, I know this has been difficult, but I'm proud of how you're handling it. You're thinking like a businesswoman, which is exactly what I need you to do for this last phase. The patronizing tone made my skin crawl, but I managed to smile and nod appropriately. I should have an answer for you by tomorrow evening. Will that work? Perfect. Marcus kissed my forehead, a gesture that felt like a predator marking its territory. I have a client dinner tonight, so I'll be late. Take the evening to finalize your decision. After Marcus left, I called Sarah to update her on the day's developments. Her reaction to Rachel's findings was swift and decisive. We need to coordinate with federal investigators immediately, she said. If Marcus is running a money laundering operation, it changes every aspect of your divorce strategy. But Julia, you need to be prepared for the possibility that this could get dangerous. What do you mean? I mean that people who launder money for organized crime don't just lose their jobs when they get caught. They become liabilities. If Marcus realizes you're the source of the leak that destroyed his operation, if he believes you've put him in danger with his criminal associates. Sarah didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the implications. By choosing to expose Marcus's crimes, I wasn't just fighting for my business. I was potentially putting my life at risk. It's too late to back out now, I said. And honestly, I'm not sure I'd want to, even if I could. Sarah, this man threatened to destroy everything I've worked for because I wouldn't be his perfect corporate wife. Now I find out he's been using our marriage as cover for criminal activity. He made this war inevitable. Then we finish it, Sarah said simply. Rachel will have everything ready for the FBI tomorrow morning. Are you prepared for what comes next? I looked around the house where I'd lived for 6 years, thinking about the woman I'd been when Marcus and I first moved in together. She'd believed in love, partnership, building a life together based on mutual respect and shared dreams. That woman had been naive but not weak, trusting but not foolish. I'm ready, I said. That night, I lay awake listening to Marcus move around the house when he returned from his client dinner. I heard him go into his office, probably checking his accounts and communications, managing the criminal enterprise he'd built while I slept beside him, trusting and unaware. Tomorrow, federal agents would tear apart that office, seizing evidence that would end his career and potentially his freedom. Pinnacle Financial Group would discover that one of their senior executives had been using company resources and relationships to facilitate money laundering. The professional network he'd threatened to use against me would turn into a liability, as every colleague and contact distanced themselves from the scandal. But more than that, tomorrow would mark the day I stopped being a victim of Marcus's manipulation and became the architect of his downfall. He'd underestimated me, dismissed my intelligence and strength, assumed that 6 years of marriage had made me dependent and controllable. He was about to learn just how wrong he'd been. As dawn broke over Seattle, painting the city in shades of gold and rose, I prepared for the final act of our marriage. Marcus had written the script with his ultimatums and threats, but I was about to give it an ending he never saw coming. The reckoning was at hand. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of the new Harmony Spaces headquarters looking out over Elliott Bay as my team presented our largest contract to date, a complete design overhaul of 3 Amazon subsidiary buildings. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were in the same building where Marcus had once worked, 3 floors below the office where federal agents had arrested him on charges of money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The Seattle Times Business section sat folded on my desk, its headline still surreal to read. Former Pinnacle executive sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The article detailed how Marcus Brennan had pleaded guilty to orchestrating a sophisticated money laundering operation that had moved over $50 million through shell companies and offshore accounts. The FBI's investigation, triggered by evidence provided by an unnamed source, had unraveled a network connecting Seattle's financial district to Eastern European organized crime. Pinnacle Financial Group had settled the civil lawsuit I'd filed for their employees' interference with my business contracts. The settlement was substantial enough to fund Harmony Space's expansion into commercial real estate development. But more importantly, it had sent a clear message to Seattle's business community about the consequences of using professional relationships for personal vendettas. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. Divorce finalized. Congratulations on your freedom. The divorce had been surprisingly straightforward once Marcus was in federal custody. His criminal defense attorneys had advised him to cooperate fully with all proceedings, hoping to demonstrate remorse and responsibility. To the federal judge handling his sentencing, I'd received full ownership of Harmony Spaces, the house, and our legitimate joint assets, while Marcus's criminal assets were seized by the government. Julia? My assistant knocked on the conference room door. Your 3 o'clock appointment is here. I turned from the window to see Rachel Martinez enter the room, looking professional in a navy blazer that concealed her detective's instincts behind a businesswoman's facade. She'd become not just my private investigator, but a trusted friend, someone who understood the courage it had taken to expose the man I'd once loved. How are you feeling? She asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. Free, I said, and meant it completely. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living my own life instead of performing someone else's version of what my life should be. Rachel opened a folder and pulled out a newspaper clipping from the Vancouver Sun. I thought you'd want to see this. Victor Kozlov was arrested in British Columbia yesterday. The money trail you helped expose led investigators to his entire North American operation. I read the article with a mixture of satisfaction and lingering disbelief. The evidence I'd gathered from Marcus's home office had not only destroyed his life, but had unraveled an international criminal network. The scared woman who'd discovered divorce papers 6 months ago could never have imagined she'd become a key witness in a federal investigation of organized crime. Any word on whether they'll need me to testify in the Kozlov case? I asked. Doubtful. Marcus's cooperation and the documentary evidence were enough to build their case. You're officially done with that part of your life. Rachel closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. So what's next for the notorious Julia? Brennan? I laughed at the description. Notorious wasn't how I'd ever imagined myself, but I'd learned to embrace the reputation that had emerged from the scandal. In Seattle's business community, I was now known as someone who didn't back down from a fight, who couldn't be intimidated or controlled. It was a reputation that had brought Harmony Spaces more clients than we could handle. World domination, I said with mock seriousness. Starting with the Pacific Northwest interior design market and expanding from there. I don't doubt it. Rachel stood to leave, then paused at the door. Julia, I've worked hundreds of cases involving financial abuse and domestic manipulation. Most victims never find the strength to fight back, let alone win as completely as you did. You should be proud of what you accomplished. After Rachel left, I walked back to the window overlooking the bay. Somewhere in the federal correctional facility in Sheridan, Oregon, Marcus was probably still trying to understand how his perfect plan had backfired so spectacularly. He'd thought he could use the legal system to control me, leverage his professional connections to destroy my independence, force me back into the role of dutiful corporate wife. Instead, his arrogance had exposed the criminal enterprise that had been hiding beneath our marriage. His threats had motivated me to investigate deeply enough to uncover evidence that law enforcement had been seeking for years. His certainty that I was weak and dependent had blinded him to the possibility that I might be intelligent enough to turn his own weapons against him. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. The caller ID showed the Henderson Group, the client Marcus had claimed to sabotage when this whole ordeal began. Julia, it's Patricia Henderson. I wanted to personally congratulate you on the Amazon contract announcement. Incredible work. Thank you, Patricia. That means a lot coming from you. I also wanted to apologize, belatedly, for the confusion last year when we temporarily paused our project. We were given some concerning information about potential instability at your firm, but obviously that information was completely unfounded. I smiled, remembering the fear I'd felt when Marcus first threatened to destroy my business relationships. No apology necessary. I understand you had to protect your company's interests. Still, I want to make it right. We're planning a major expansion project for our West Coast operations. Would Harmony Spaces be interested in submitting a proposal? After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my office, processing how completely my life had transformed. 6 months ago, I'd been a successful but vulnerable woman, married to a man who saw my achievements as threats to his control. I'd built a thriving business while remaining emotionally dependent on someone who was willing to destroy everything I cared about to maintain his dominance. Now I was the CEO of the fastest-growing interior design firm in Seattle, with a reputation for both creative excellence and uncompromising integrity. I had financial independence, professional respect, and most importantly, the knowledge that I was strong enough to survive anything life threw at me. The intercom on my desk buzzed. "Julia, your 4 o'clock is here. The interview with Seattle. Business journal about the Amazon contract." "Send them in," I said, straightening my blazer and checking my reflection in the window glass. As the journalist settled into the chair across from my desk, I thought about the story I was about to tell. Not the whole truth, obviously, but the public version about building a business, overcoming obstacles, and learning to trust my own judgment. It was a story about resilience, about refusing to let anyone else define the limits of what I could achieve. "Ms. Brennan," the journalist began, "6 months ago, there were rumors that Harmony Spaces was facing financial difficulties and might be shutting down. Now you're landing the biggest commercial contracts in the city. What changed?" I smiled, thinking about Marcus's ultimatum, his certainty that he could force me to choose between my marriage and my career. He'd been right about one thing. I had been forced to make a choice, but he'd been completely wrong about which choice I would make. "I learned to stop letting other people's limitations become my own," I said. "Sometimes you have to be willing to risk everything you have to protect everything you are." As the interview continued, I found myself thinking about the women who might read this story. Women trapped in relationships where their achievements were seen as threats, where their independence was slowly being eroded by partners who confused love with control. If my story could reach even one of them, could show them that it was possible to fight back and win. The journalist asked about my plans for the future, about where I saw Harmony Spaces in 5 years. I talked about expansion, about building a company culture that valued both excellence and authenticity, about creating opportunities for other women to succeed in business without having to sacrifice their identities. But privately, I thought about the deeper truth that I couldn't share in a business magazine interview. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, successful but not truly free, accomplished, but still seeking validation from someone who would never value what I had to offer. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder and wiser and infinitely more dangerous to anyone who might try to control her. Marcus had wanted to strip away my independence, my professional identity, my sense of self-worth. Instead, he'd inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible, absolute proof that I was strong enough to survive anything, smart enough to turn any attack back on my attacker, and valuable enough to fight for with everything I had. As the Seattle skyline grew dark beyond my office windows, I closed my laptop and prepared to head home. Not to the penthouse I'd shared with Marcus, but to the Ballard loft I'd bought with the settlement money. It was smaller but entirely mine, filled with my books and my art, and my vision of what a home should be. The drive through the city took me past the Pinnacle Financial Building, now mostly dark except for the security lights. Somewhere in that tower, new executives were working late, chasing promotions and partnerships, building careers that they hoped would give them the success and recognition they craved. I hoped they were doing it honestly, with integrity and respect for the people in their lives, because if they weren't, if they thought they could use threats and manipulation to control the people who loved them, well, they might find out that some women don't stay victims for long. Some women fight back, and some women win.